We've been looking forward to getting to Northrend ever since we were making the original game. When we made Outland, which was something that we were equally excited about, we were kind of testing the boundaries of, just how far can we push things conceptually. And I think, Adreni flying a spaceship and crashing it down onto Azeroth was probably as far as we can push it for the time being.
There's something really cool about Lich King now where we're getting back to terrestrial Azeroth, and there's normal trees and mountains and snow and, things that are much more familiar to most players, right, in terms of, pop fantasy or, even the Warcraft they've known.
Our goal for Northrend was to make sure that it wasn't one massive white continent of snow. We really think that change up is important for players. It feels like a big reward when you get to change environments.
And I think that we struck a pretty good balance where as you progressed north throughout the continent, it got colder and snowier. And by the time you actually hit the two northernmost zones, Ice Crown and Storm Peaks, we just blast you with the stuff, and it's really icy, and you're up really high, and there's snow and wind and, well, evil everywhere.
As you're leveling up in this expansion, you constantly have the choice of I'm not just gelling with this area. I think I'll go to Borean Tundra instead of Howling Fjord, or I'll go to Grizzly Hills instead of Dragonblight. There's a lot of choice that players can make.
Working with concepts is very important. Our game is very painterly looking anyway. So when we start with a painting, well, that's the best place to start. We know that's what we want it to look like. And what we can get from a concept piece is our colors. We can color pick our fog, our ground, our trees. You have to have some kind of image in your head and with the colors and everything else on paper so you can duplicate this zone.
It's an interesting way to work. Working with something that's been established like that, especially from a lore perspective, there's so much that we really have to make sure that we're staying true to.
We always take into consideration, how is the player going to first see this place? Where are they going to step? How are they going to feel when they first see something new?
When you're working with a 2D concept for an environment, you're not taking into account the space or how far those mountains actually are, and so it's easy to shade them light purple in your concept, but then when you get your fog color into the environment and it's interacting with the texture color on the mountainside, you always have that kind of that shift that happens where it's like, okay, it's not going to be exactly like the concept, but it's actually cooler because we can do this other thing, or we can push the fog out this distance, try to match that as much as possible. So really it's just, I think that's where being like a 3D artist comes into play, where you have that knowledge of, okay, we know what we're shooting for, but there's all these tricks that we can use to get to that.
And there's 6 people working on different things. There's one guy making a tree, another guy making a rock, another guy making a tile set, lighting, somebody making the watercolor. All of that has to look like it's cohesive in one zone, one kind of color scheme throughout, and the concept is going to be the thing, the anchor that everyone's going to come back to.
Moving Dalaran to Northrend popped pretty quickly, and it just felt immediately that that's exactly what we should do with it. And the idea was that in Warcraft 3, the Undead Scourge rolled in and pretty much wiped everybody out, or came close to wiping everybody out. The wizards saved their city.
So they decided, okay, we need to move this to a safer location. What's safe from ground attack? Air. So they start working on a massive, powerful spell, all of them, to rip Dalaran out of the ground and teleport it all the way over to float above Northrend.
The thing that's also really neat from a player perspective is Dalaran's been covered by the bubble since we launched World of Warcraft, to see what happens when that bubble pops off and see what is left, and the idea that the mages of Kirin Tor have kind of lifted the city up and actually moved it to another continent is pretty badass. Can I say that? Okay.
It's also got a really cool sewer section underneath it, and it's something that I've always regretted us not having in any of our cities. It's just such a staple of fantasy lore and cities to have these little sewers going under a city.
And we wanted to do something to give the city a little bit more of a layered feel, because when it came up and moved, there's a huge section of rock that's still attached to the bottom of it, and so a lot of people saw that and thought, was there even a sewer under Dalaran? Because it was a magical city, and but they would have infrastructure just like any other city would. But we also thought it would be a cool place to do the things that we can't do up on the normal city streets.
Something we've seen, a lot is that a lot of players like to duel while they're kind of sitting around in the city doing things like the auction house, etc. So we've built in an arena into Dalaran where players can actually go and duel each other within the city.
It's a little bit more of a fight club, a little bit of an underground type thing, and the sewer just fits perfect because it's a new thing we haven't done before, so we can have water on the ground. Basically, we're kind of thinking of it as like the wizard's drain, so they would pour alchemy potions and things like that down, and all that stuff kind of ends up down here.
How we expect players to progress is that they're going to do 5-person dungeons on their way up. When they get to maximum level, they'll probably do 5-person max level dungeons for a little while before segueing into heroic. Once they're doing heroic, they're going to be gearing up to do Naxxramas, which is our first tier of rating. At Naxxramas, they can make a choice of going the 10-person route or the 25-person route, or if they want to, they can do both. They're on separate lockouts.
More people are going to be able to experience the higher end raids now, since you can do them as a 10-man as well as a 25-man. They won't be getting as good of loot, but they'll still be getting the exact same experience as far as from a gameplay standpoint and experiencing the lore.
Something with Burning Crusade was a lot of the dungeons they were cool in and of themselves, but they didn't really tie in very closely to the outdoor world and the stories that were taking place. So we're working with the quest team a whole lot more.
We would rather you quest through a whole zone for a weeks, it depends on the player, weeks, days, but they would quest through the whole zone, and then their final kind of big conclusion is to get to do a dungeon, and then have that dungeon actually make sense and play into all the quest lines they've done before.
We're also trying to do some great scripted boss encounters and do some early on, so players who aren't max level get a chance to get a taste of what it's like, and hopefully it kind of incentivizes them to progress on to the more difficult stuff.
The Nexus was a lot of fun to build because it was just so far out, right? And this big beam of magic kind of shooting up the center, kind of the focus point for all arcane magic on Azeroth. Blue dragons flying around it all day long. I think the final solution for it turned out really, really good, and the interior guys just blew our minds. I mean, it just feels unlike any space we've built so far. It was just really fun to conceptualize. It was one of those concepts where it wasn't defined by like a specific building or an architectural set. The inside is, but it's just rings floating in the sky, and with trees growing on top of them.
And they'll actually allow players to adventure on those individual rings and then fly to the other rings. So it's a really neat idea for a dungeon, for something we've never really done in World of Warcraft, is let players use their flying mounts in an actual dungeon setting.
We built a whole separate subzone called the Koldara. It's a little island that floats off the coast of Borean there. And that whole specific area was built just for that instance. And so when players get there, they're going to quest a little bit around it. They'll find out what's going on, and then they'll be sent in to investigate. So when you go into the dungeon, it shouldn't be a question of, just looking at what you need to click off the checklist to finish the quest. We would hope it would be more of, I want to finish this quest so I can find out more about what's happening and progress the story.